Dark Souls is a hard game. You've heard that sentiment expressed if you were anywhere near the gaming zeitgeist within the 2010s. If Dark Souls didn't start the debates, then it certainly ignited discourse into the subject of difficulty within the video game medium. Specifically, if some games being too hard is a problem, and with each new Fromsoft release, the debate comes up again. This is a tradition that many have rightly memed upon for its association with hack gaming journalists that complain about Sekiro needing an easy mode and other such sentiments. My view of it has always been very simple. Not all games need to appeal to everybody. Therefore, Fromsoft need not change their design philosophy to cater to people who need to learn to meet the games halfway instead of expecting them to cater to their tastes. Dark Souls is not a perfect game, nor are any of its sequels, spiritual or otherwise. I think the game's biggest fans will be the first to tell you that a lot of that game sucks ass, especially in the second half of the adventure. Even in the oft-praised first half, there's more than one moment where the game openly laughs at you, as it mercilessly sends a dragon you couldn't have predicted to instantly kill you on a bridge directly after you beat the previous boss, and good luck getting back there without dying to get your currency back, by the way. However, it offered something that no other series did at the time, and rarely has a game come along since that recaptured that feeling. The feeling of tension. Oh sure, other games have had hard sections or levels or bosses, but rarely was every moment of the experience an edge-of-your-seat affair, where death awaited you around every corner, where each new path could potentially lead to a mini-boss you weren't prepared for, or to a trap that will drain your limited restorative resources. In Dark Souls, you were put up against odds that were stacked against you. You play a small gnat in a world inhabited by gods, and the appeal of, despite that, overcoming everything through brutal trial and error is the design mentality. Try again, and eventually you will succeed. But Dark Souls isn't hard. That's the greatest lie the mainstream gaming scene has ever told you. Yes, it's punishing, that's undeniable. Small mistakes often lead to, if not an immediate death, a slow cascade of further sacrifices that will eventually result in a trip back to the last bonfire checkpoint you stayed at. That said, almost every enemy in the game follows the same general principles that you do as the player. While they don't have to manage a stamina bar, most all enemy actions have heavy delay in the same way that player actions do. Each button press is deliberate, and if you don't learn that, then you will suffer when playing through this game. As well, while the environments are complicated and enemies await you in very unfavorable locations, the areas are designed in such a way that the cautious player will always come out ahead. You can usually kite one or two enemies at a time out of a larger group to more safely handle them, or you can notice enemies that are waiting to pop out of the woodwork to surprise you and strike preemptively. Shortcuts can be found to keep backtracking to a minimum, and you can go around certain rooms that don't follow these rules. If you're struggling in combat, you can try a new weapon that might help you more than a dinky short sword, or you can move to a magic-oriented build if you'd prefer to stay back. Against bosses you may be struggling with, such as the infamous Ornstein and Smo, you can summon an NPC helper to separate the two knights and have a much more manageable time. For every one of its challenges, Dark Souls gives you everything you need to overcome it, if you would just put in the effort. To enjoy Dark Souls, you have to meet it halfway. It isn't going to hold your hand, and it isn't going to be fair all of the time, but it will be fair most of the time, during the important moments especially, and most will come out the other side saying that it was a worthwhile gaming experience. And then Fromsoft moved on from Dark Souls. They went on to make Dark Souls 2, into Bloodborne, into Dark Souls 3, into Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and most recently we had Elden Ring take the gaming scene by storm. And with each subsequent release, Fromsoft strayed further and further from the mentality they had when designing that first game. Gradually, as the series continued, it got less and less fair. Before we move on from that statement though, I need to elaborate on it. Fairness does not equal quality. Don't get it twisted that I'm saying that the series peaked with Dark Souls 1. Actually, despite my issues with them, I think Bloodborne into Dark Souls 3 into Sekiro is the series peak so far. I, like many Dark Souls enjoyers, love a good challenge. One of my favorite boss fights in any game is Sword Saint Ishin in Sekiro, and that dude took me like 6 hours to beat my first time. Ishin is also not fair. Ishin does things that the player simply can't do. He has range that the player will never be able to replicate on a consistent basis, speed that the player can't keep up with save for reacting to it. The only thing that you have that Ishin doesn't is an answer for his lightning redirection, which only comes up in his third phase. Yet, Ishin remains one of my favorite bosses in games. Why? The appeal of Ishin is his difficulty. Yes, he can do all of these things, but each of them has an answer with something you can do, and each successful read on your part brings Ishin closer to broken posture and an instant kill. You are put up against the greatest swordsman to ever exist in the prime of his ability, and despite all odds, you defeat him. That is some good stuff. Back to the matter at hand, Elden Ring is where Fromsoft lost the plot. Elden Ring is a spiritual sequel to the Dark Souls trilogy, featuring many of the same weapons and enemies, and extremely similar mechanics to those games, albeit while taking some elements from Sekiro as well, and adding an entire open world element on top of that. Elden Ring is a very technically impressive game in the amount of content it has. It's also, by far, my least favorite Fromsoft game to date. Now, part of that, I will admit, is my fault. I don't like open world games. I will always prefer a more focused experience to an open area where you can go anywhere at any time. Those are just the types of games that I gravitate toward. Today, to mitigate my own biases, I will not be talking about the open world aspect unless it's positive. If that's kosher enough for you, then I present my primary argument. Elden Ring itself was designed to be unfair. Each FromSoft game before it, I believe, does not have this issue. Even those that turned out to contain unfair elements, I believe were designed to be fair fundamentally speaking. I cannot say that for Elden Ring, specifically regarding its boss fights, which are the series' main appeal for most people. Elden Ring's bosses contain all of the worst parts of the Capra Demon boss in Dark Souls 1, and it feels intentionally designed to be that way. For those unaware, the Capra Demon is one of those aforementioned times when the game laughs at you. After going through Lower Undead you arrived at the Fog Gate and are met with a tiny arena that's hard to maneuver in, an enemy that severely outranges the player despite being of similar size, obstacles and debris everywhere that the player can bonk off of while the boss cannot, and 2 random dog mobs that immediately attack and must be dealt with before you can even focus on the Capra Demon. This boss, for good reason, is often considered the worst true boss in the game. This is obviously not including the Bed of Chaos, which isn't a true boss. Taken on their own, each of these elements wouldn't be too difficult to handle at this point in the game. You've fought dogs before, you've fought a boss in a narrow arena before, etc. Hell, the Capra Demon only has like 3 attacks that are all extremely easy to react to, so actually fighting it is so easy that it becomes a regular enemy later on in the game. It's when you combine all of these elements that you experience the death knell of any aspiring action combat system: randomness. The combination of events that must occur to reach even close to a stable boss state is unreal. If you decide that you don't hate yourself, you'll likely go for the most consistent strategy: go up the stairs. The Capra Demon doesn't like the stairs and isn't likely to follow you up, letting you separated from the dogs. That said, even this has a random result, as there are 2 dogs that can do whatever they want. Do they climb the stairs? Do they fall down? Is their animation randomly stalled by the uneven terrain? Do they attack immediately, or do they try to strafe you? Will the Capra Demon instantly kill you if you fall down? Randomness is bad for action systems. I'd argue it's bad for almost any system save for those inherently designed around chance, such as dice or card games. Randomness takes agency away from the player and puts it into the hands of the game's random number generator, or luck generator. For most players, especially those who enjoy when Dark Souls is fair, this is not fun. This is also what every Elden Ring boss is like. Note, randomness is not necessarily synonymous with unpredictable. Boss patterns should be somewhat unpredictable in an action game, and you should have to learn to read each boss's tells and reads to successfully navigate an ever-expanding flowchart of options. The flow of Dark Souls boss combat is to dodge or block against these attacks and then retaliate in the opening they leave. The reason why I say a game like Dark Souls 3 isn't as fair as Dark Souls 1 is because of your speed versus the enemy's speed, which imbalances this flow in the enemy's favor. Dark Souls 3 gave its bosses the speed, range, and aggression of Bloodborne's bosses, which were already a far cry from what players were used to, and put them against the slower Dark Souls player character. To compensate, your dodge roll was given heavily extended invincibility frames, allowing you to roll through most combo strings. Elden Ring reduced the amount of iframes in your roll, to note. With that in mind, let's talk about the main boss innovation Elden Ring introduced to the series: optional combo paths. The first major boss that most players will run into is Margit the Fell Omen. He guards the entrance to the first of the game's legacy dungeons, or large semi-linear zones that are meant to feel like a traditional Dark Souls area. You want to kill Margit on basically any playthrough for access to that dungeon. Margit is also an infuriating fight. Not only is he faster than most Dark Souls 3 bosses, including its endgame bosses, but he has an optional combo extension where he summons a spectral dagger and swipes quickly at the player. This, I kid you not, is my least favorite move in the entire fucking game. The thing is, this dagger swipe works exactly as intended, which is what other poorly designed FromSoft attacks lack, even those later in Elden Ring. The purpose of it is to disincentivize players from capitalizing on their supposed opportunities. After most of Margit's attacks, the player has a potential opening to counter. This is very good for a first boss. It's a good way to ease the player into that flow that I talked about earlier. Dodge, counter, block, counter, repeat. Elden Ring even introduced 2 player mechanics specifically meant to enhance this flow, that being jump attacks, which damage enemy posture for a riposte opportunity, and guard counters, which do much the same. So why, for the love of all that is holy, is this stupid dagger attack here? To me, it does nothing but ruin the fight. It rips away that flow and replaces it with another less engaging one. Margit now has one attack that you can safely punish, that being his delayed wind-up attack in phase 1 and his jump slam in phase 2, which are essentially the same thing. Everything else, you have to be wary of that dagger swipe. So now the player has 2 options. 1, they can attack as if the dagger doesn't exist. More often than not, they will be killed over this. 2, they can anticipate the dagger attack and attempt to dodge it. This doesn't work because the attack comes out too fast to properly react to it, especially when he could just as easily be doing one of his other attacks that the rest of the fight teaches you to watch first to determine if you need to immediately roll or not. The hidden option, by the way, the only one that's consistent, is to just back off and wait for the one opening you actually have to hit him consistently. By itself, an unpredictable follow-up wouldn't be too much of an issue. It's everything else Elden Ring does with its bosses that makes it the single worst thing in FromSoft. Sekiro introduced the idea of bosses reading your inputs. For example, Genichiro will instantly use his arrow attack when you press the button to heal. No exceptions, assuming he's at a neutral point in his AI pattern. In that case, it was designed to make the player panic, but if you are calm, you will always have time to block the incoming arrow attack from a heal. Margit does something similar, where he will instantly throw his spectral dagger at you twice when you go to heal. Not only is the healing animation longer in Elden Ring, but the dagger is inconsistent. The environment that you fight Margit in is slanted in such a way that most camera angles don't actually let you tell when the dagger will just go into the ground harmlessly. As well, if you aren't far enough away, you don't have time to dodge the dagger. It's no longer a make you panic move, it's a punish move, and every boss has one. This forces you to use one of your scant few safe punish windows in any given boss to heal instead, making the fights even slower. And this isn't even to mention the ways that Margit disregards any and all semblance of realism or consequences by intentionally winding up a slam attack for 3 whole seconds in phase 1. For gameplay, this is meant to psych the player out, and the idea is somewhat sound. I've always been a proponent of reasonable delayed attacks, but this is just about the worst way to do it imaginable. If Margit did anything to defend himself during this windup, like the next boss in the game, by the way, I'd be much more open to this kind of like big, epic, cinematic windup attack. But he doesn't do that. It makes no sense. And yes, even fantasy series, unless stated explicitly, must adhere to the laws of reality when it comes to inflicting and receiving wounds, you poser that's about to type out some snide remark in the comments. As a melee player, your only true respite in the Margit fight is parrying. Almost all of his regular staff attacks can be parried, but even this system is far more hostile than it was in the Dark Souls series. Parrying is now linked to the new posture mechanic, meaning a successful parry isn't going to lead to a riposte. You have to get multiple parries in relatively quick succession to secure that riposte, and oh of course, you aren't allowed to see any kind of posture bar that Margit has. It isn't like this exact mechanic was already implemented in Sekiro, which had a posture bar and it worked perfectly fine. To reiterate, you have an extremely fast and aggressive boss in a system where the player is very slow. He has random combo extensions that disincentivize the player from capitalizing on opportunities they would have if this boss were in any other game, in addition to reading the player's inputs to put them at as big of a disadvantage as possible. This isn't even to mention the hitbox issues that have plagued FromSoft boss design from day one, or the massive amount of tracking on almost every attack, making circle strafing a non-option unless on specific attacks. Well, Okay, maybe Margit is an exception. Let's find a random boss from the open world. These are supposed to be easier, if still challenging, encounters to beef you up for the main bosses, right? Well, there's this cave in an early area that has a bear at the end. Ah. Neat. Yeah, so the problems with Margit are present in literally every boss in the entire game. Fantastic. So, why is that? Did Fromsoft just forget how to do good boss design? Is it a product of time crunches, greed, a misguided attempts to boost playtime? No, it's just a different design mentality on their part. I believe that the boss design comes from the expectations of the open world. The Margit boss, I believe, is very poorly designed from a traditional Souls game perspective. That said, you aren't expected to fight him in a traditional Souls game way. You're expected to have buffed up before coming here. You're expected to have gotten a big fuck off magic spell to chunk his HP bar. You're expected to use the new summon mechanic to draw aggro away from you to get new retaliation openings. In short, you're expected to cheese this boss, and every boss like it. These various options that had iterations in earlier games as options for players that struggle to play the intended way are now the intended way. Put another way, Dark Souls was designed to be fair and people thought it was hard, whereas Elden Ring is just designed to be hard without bothering to try and be fair. This is what I mean when I say they lost the plot. They're literally not trying to do the same thing anymore. I don't think this is an issue either, but Fromsoft only went halfway. They also did the same thing much more successfully with Bloodborne, increasing the speed of encounters and making a more frantic combat system in general compared to Dark Souls. But the difference is that Bloodborne doesn't play like Dark Souls at all. It's an entirely separate beast, yes, with some similarities and shared mechanics like a stamina bar, but wholly separate nonetheless. Elden Ring, meanwhile, plays like Dark Souls. It has the same moves as Dark Souls, the same combos, the same movement, the same slow, clunky feel that the player has had since the first game. I don't know why Fromsoft purposefully designed the game this way and told you that you were playing the game wrong when you tried to play it like Dark Souls. That was their biggest mistake. Before we end off the video though, I want to preemptively get ahead of the Fromsexuals in the comments that will try and dispute this for a particularly dumb reason. The get good mentality is a huge detriment to the overall gaming space, a huge turnoff for potential new fans of Fromsoft's library, and also not applicable in this context. I can beat Elden Ring if I really want to, and I can beat Margit without much difficulty nowadays. I just don't have any fun doing so, and have no personal incentive to play through the rest of the game because of that. Along with extremely unhelpful and condescending advice given by players that don't know what they're talking about, the most common argument you hear is that the Elden Ring bosses are good because you can do this specific thing and beat it no problem, or that a boss is actually really well designed because it can be beaten without taking a single hit. Any can statement like that. These types of comments lack any amount of awareness in my opinion, and are the worst kind of smarm you can imagine, masquerading as helpful, innocent advice while actively dismissing the experiences of anyone but themselves for the sole sake of boosting their own ego. If you attempt to do this in these comments, I will laugh at you, just like Fromsoft does for your never-ending crusade of excusing their terrible new video game boss designs. Thank you all for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Until the end, my friends.